This is a story about a man forced to execute his best friend. It wasn't an act of betrayal, it was an act of mercy. And understanding the reason why is the key to understanding the dark, timeless side of the American dream. At its heart are two men etched into literary history, yet as real as the dust on their worn-out clothes, George Milton and Lenny Small. George is small and sharp, his face etched with the lines of constant worry, his movements quick and decisive. He is the brain, the planner, the guardian. Beside him lumbers Lenny, his opposite in every way, a giant of a man with a strength he can't comprehend, and the simple, trusting, and dangerously innocent mind of a young child. They are bindle-stiffs, transient workers drifting through the great ranches of 1930s California, owning nothing but the clothes on their backs and a shared history of trouble left behind them. We meet them on the road, their story already in progress, their dynamic set in a weary, familiar rhythm. Their relationship is a complex dance of frustration and fierce loyalty. We see it in the small, repeated rituals of their life. George, walking ahead, always vigilant. Lenny, trying to imitate him, but getting distracted by a dead mouse he wants to keep in his pocket, just to feel its soft fur. George's reaction is a practiced explosion of anger. He throws the mouse away, lecturing Lenny on cleanliness, on the trouble he always causes, on the jobs they've lost because of him. This cycle has happened before, and it will happen again. Yet, beneath the anger is a deep, unbreakable sense of duty. George's voice is often a sharp bark, complaining about the burden Lenny represents. He fantasizes aloud about a life of freedom, where he could take his $50 at the end of the month and spend it in a saloon, no questions asked, no one to look after. But this is a fantasy he tells himself to cope. The truth is, his life is defined by Lenny. He's the one who remembers to carry Lenny's work card, the one who warns him not to speak to the new boss, the one who guides him through a world too complex and cruel for his simple nature. And what holds this fragile bond together is a story they tell each other, a mantra against the darkness. They call it the dream. It's more than a plan. It's a vision, a prayer recited in the quiet moments by a flickering campfire or in a dark, unfamiliar bunkhouse. It is the dream of a small farm, just a few acres of their own, a place where they are their own bosses, where the crop they harvest is their own, where no one can fire them. It is the 1930s version of escaping the rat race, of quitting the soul-crushing job to build something real and lasting. In a world that sees them as disposable, the farm is a declaration that their lives matter. George paints the picture with the loving detail of an artist, a story he knows by heart. A little shack, freshly whitewashed, with a windmill to pump water. A kitchen with a stove big enough for winter nights, acres of alfalfa that would grow thick and green, a vegetable patch with fat carrots and onions, a pig pen, smoke rising from their own chimney, the smell of rain on their own soil, and for Lenny, the most important part, the sacred promise, rabbits. Soft, furry rabbits of all colors, living in hutches that he, Lenny, will be allowed to build and tend. This vision is their salvation. It's the reason they endure the grueling labor, the poor food, the contempt of others. It's the one thing that separates them from the other lonely men who drift from ranch to ranch, with no past to speak of and no future to believe in. Their dream is their armor against a world designed to break them, a world forged in the crucible of the Great Depression. This was a time of profound economic anxiety that echoes our own fears of instability today. The Roaring Twenties had ended not with a whimper, but with the cataclysmic crash of the stock market. Banks failed, fortunes evaporated, and a creeping paralysis gripped the nation. For those in the heartland, the economic disaster was compounded by an ecological one. A decade-long drought descended on the Great Plains, and the land itself began to die. The topsoil, over-farmed and stripped of its native grasses, dried to a fine powder. When the winds came, they created monstrous rolling clouds of black dust that blotted out the sun and choked the life out of everything they touched. They were called black blizzards. This was the Dust Bowl. It triggered one of the largest internal migrations in American history. Hundreds of thousands of families from Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Texas, collectively and often derisively called Okies, were forced off their land. They packed what they could into dilapidated jalopies and headed west on Route 66, chasing a rumor, a handbill, a desperate hope for work in the fertile valleys of California. They arrived not to a promised land, but to a place overflowing with cheap labor and simmering with resentment. They were seen as invaders, competing for scarce jobs, living in squalid camps by the roadside. This was the world John Steinbeck knew in his bones. He was a Californian, born and raised in the Salinas Valley. He wasn't a distant journalist chronicling a tragedy. He had worked on the ranches and farms himself. He had packed lettuce, harvested sugar beets, and lived among the very bindle stiffs he wrote about. He saw that the true poverty of the era was not just economic, but spiritual. He was writing about a loneliness epidemic nearly a century before we had a name for it in our own hyper-connected, yet deeply isolated, digital age. He saw men who traveled alone because friendships were a liability, men who were suspicious and guarded because trust was a luxury they couldn't afford. The story goes that Steinbeck's own puppy, an Irish setter named Toby, famously ate the first draft of the manuscript, forcing the author to rewrite it from memory, a setback that perhaps only deepened his understanding of how easily our labors of love can be destroyed. If you appreciate stories that dive deep into the heart of classic literature, consider subscribing to the channel. We explore the history and meaning behind the world's greatest books every week. His direct experience gave the novel its unshakable authenticity. The character of Lenny was inspired by a real man Steinbeck had worked with on a sugar beet farm. He was a gentle giant who was institutionalized after tragically killing a ranch foreman. Steinbeck was haunted by this, seeing not a monster, but a man whose innocence was a fatal flaw in a brutal world. To structure this raw material, Steinbeck designed the book as a play novelette, writing it in scenes that could be lifted directly onto a stage. This creates a claustrophobic intensity, a feeling that the characters are trapped together, their fates unfolding in a few confined spaces: a riverbank, a bunkhouse, a barn. He even took the book's title from a Robert Burns poem about a mouse whose home is destroyed by a farmer's plow. The best laid schemes of mice and men often go awry. It was the perfect banner for a story about how our most precious dreams can be annihilated by a world that simply does not care. When George and Lenny arrive at the ranch in Soledad, they step into a microcosm of this harsh world. The bunkhouse isn't a home. It's a temporary holding cell for human labor. It smells of sweat, leather, and disinfectant. Each man has a bunk and an apple box nailed to the wall for his few possessions: a comb, a razor, maybe a pulp magazine. It's a place populated not by villains, but by men who have been worn down, their spirits eroded by loneliness and the constant, gnawing fear of being disposable. Here, a man's worth is measured only by the work his body can produce. The unofficial leader of the bunkhouse is Slim, the head mule skinner. He moves with a quiet majesty, his authority so natural that no one questions it. His understanding is deep, his judgment fair. He is the story's moral compass, a figure of quiet grace in a graceless world. His presence highlights the immaturity and insecurity of the other men, especially Candy, the old swamper. Candy lost his hand in a ranch accident years ago and now serves as a cleaner. He lives in quiet terror of the day the boss decides he's too old to be useful. His only companion is his dog, a creature he's had since it was a pup, now ancient, half-blind, and arthritic. It is his last link to a past with any warmth. But to the other men, the dog is just a smelly, useless burden. A ranch hand named Carlson begins a relentless campaign to have the dog put down. "He ain't no good to you," he tells Candy. "Why don't you shoot him?" The scene builds with an unbearable tension. Candy looks desperately to the other men for support, pleading silently, but finds none. They stare at the ceiling, refusing to meet his eyes. Even Slim agrees it would be a mercy. They are all complicit in their silence. Finally, with his spirit broken, Candy relents. Carlson leads the old dog outside. What follows is one of the most powerful silences in literature. The men try to busy themselves with a game of cards, the slap of the pasteboard loud in the stillness. They are all waiting. Candy lies on his bunk, facing the wall. Then, a single gunshot echoes from the darkness, flat and final. In that deafening silence hangs the unspoken law of their world and ours. The second you stop being useful, you will be erased. It is the 1930s version of being downsized, of being replaced by automation, of being deemed irrelevant in a system that values only what you can produce. Candy's quiet grief isn't just for his dog, it's for himself. This fear infects everyone. We see it in Crooks, the stable hand, the only black man on the ranch. He's segregated from the others, living in a small room off the barn, a space he has filled with books, ointments, and a proud, defensive bitterness. His intelligence is a weapon he uses to keep others at a distance, because connection has only ever brought him pain. When Lenny wanders into his room, Crooks initially taunts him, testing him with a cruel hypothetical. "Suppose George don't come back," he prods, trying to make Lenny feel the same crushing weight of loneliness he endures every day. But Lenny's disarming innocence breaks through his armor. For one fragile moment, when Candy joins them and they all speak of the dream farm, the racial barriers dissolve. The three outcasts are united by a shared hope. But the hope is viciously crushed when Curly's wife appears and reminds Crooks of his powerless place in the world. He immediately retreats back into his shell of bitter isolation. What is your interpretation of the character's loneliness? Does it stem from their circumstances or from something deeper within them? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The tension on the ranch is amplified by the presence of two characters, Curly, the boss's son, and his unnamed wife. Curly is a small man boiling with insecurity, a classic Napoleon complex. He picks fights with bigger men to prove his own toughness, and his recent marriage has only made him more possessive and paranoid. He senses a threat in Lenny's size and begins to circle him. The inevitable confrontation happens in the bunkhouse. Curly, looking for an easy target, starts beating Lenny, who is too scared to defend himself. He looks to George, pleading. Finally, George gives the command, "Get him, Lenny." In that instant, Lenny simply takes Curly's fist in his own massive hand. The other men hear a sickening crunch of bone. Curly is left whimpering, his hand utterly destroyed. It is a shocking, visceral display of the danger that lies dormant within Lenny's gentle nature. Curly's wife is the other catalyst for disaster. The men see her as a tart, a troublemaker who wears too much makeup and flirts to invite danger. But Steinbeck reveals her as a figure of profound tragedy. She is trapped in a miserable marriage to a man she hates, her own dream of becoming a movie star having dissolved into the dust of the Salinas Valley. Her constant appearances in the barn or the bunkhouse are not acts of seduction, but desperate cries for attention, for any human connection in a world that has rendered her invisible, an object defined only by her husband. She is a collection of broken dreams, just like the men who fear her. For one brief, shining moment, the dream of the farm seems within reach. When Candy overhears George and Lenny's plan, he offers his life savings, a $300 stake that could make it a reality. In that instant, the dream transforms from a fantasy into a tangible possibility. But the same forces of fate and human nature that govern this harsh world are already conspiring against them. Lenny's tragic nature, his inability to control his own strength while seeking only comfort, makes him a magnet for disaster. He is given a puppy, and in his eagerness to pet it, he accidentally kills it. He sits in the barn, grieving and terrified of George's anger when Curly's wife finds him. She sees in him something no one else does, a safe, unjudging listener. For the first time, she unburdens herself, telling him about her lonely life and her lost dream of Hollywood. In a fateful effort to comfort him, she invites him to stroke her soft hair. Lenny is overjoyed, but his clumsy, powerful hands quickly become too rough. She panics and begins to scream. Fearing he'll get in trouble, Lenny clamps his hand over her mouth to silence her, shaking her violently. In an instant, a neck snaps. The act is born not of malice, but of a terrified, childlike panic. The barn falls silent. Lenny has done another bad thing, But this time, there is no escape. The dream is not just gone, it has been brutally murdered. The story ends where it began, in the quiet, peaceful clearing by the Salinas River. But the sanctuary is now charged with a suffocating dread. The shouts of a lynch mob, led by a vengeful Curly, echo through the trees. And George, with a grim and terrible calm, knows what he must do. He finds Lenny waiting for him, just as he was told. He is not angry. He sits with his friend, and his voice is low and steady. He knows the end is here, and he chooses to make Lenny's last moments a vision of heaven, not hell. For the last time, he tells him the story. He paints the picture of the farm, of the rabbits, of the life they were supposed to have. He describes a world with no meanness, no loneliness, a place where they would belong, and he would look after Lenny, and Lenny would be safe. It is a final, beautiful lie. It is a gift of peace, an act of profound comfort before the end. As Lenny stares into the distance, lost in this vision, George pulls out the pistol he took from Carlson. His hand is shaking, the weight of the metal, a stand-in for the impossible weight in his soul. This is the ultimate test of his love and responsibility. He is saving his friend from the world's cruelty by taking all of that cruelty upon himself. He raises the gun to the back of Lenny's head, and as Lenny cries out with joy about the rabbits, George pulls the trigger. If this story moved you, share it with someone who appreciates timeless literature. The other men arrive moments later. Curly is cheated of his revenge. Only Slim, the wise and perceptive mule skinner, understands the depth of George's sacrifice. He sits beside George, comforting him, his quiet presence a rare moment of grace. He doesn't offer platitudes, he offers absolution. You had her, George. I swear you had her. He is the story's confessor, the only one who can see the mercy in the horror. The others just stare, uncomprehending. The novel's final lines are delivered by Carlson, the man who shot Candy's dog, who looks at George's silent grief in utter confusion. Now what the hell you suppose is eating them two guys? He asks. He can't see the tragedy. He doesn't understand. And the question Steinbeck leaves us with, nearly a century later, Island. Are we any different? Thank you for joining us on this journey into a classic of American literature. If you enjoyed this analysis and want to see more deep dives into the stories that shape our world, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We look forward to seeing you in the next one.